So the recording's on now. Okay, we'll jump right to the questions, and I'm going to read the questions. I've rewritten them slightly because we got a number of questions from a number of different people, and so I've sort of consolidated them into 4 main categories. We're going to start with climate change and the natural environment. So the first question is, earlier this year, Extinction Rebellion made a presentation to Council, imploring Council to declare a climate emergency in Kings County. In April, Council did just that. So now that we're officially in a climate emergency. And more recently, Council hired a climate change coordinator and published a climate change mitigation plan. Given there has been a sharp increase in the number of extreme weather events over the previous 10 years, such as hurricanes, subtropical storms, and more extreme temperatures, and this summer a drought, do you think the plan adequately protects residents? And we'll begin with Jen.
That's a very good question. I actually have the plan sitting over there on my desk, but I haven't gone through it in detail in a few days. I'm generally of the opinion that as much as we can do, we need to do. And the best time to do it would have been about 20 years ago. So we're doing what we can now without a time machine. So I think emergency is absolutely the correct word for it. I would, caution against panic and, rash decisions, because it's still something I would say that we need to invest rather than spend. And a lot of the time, traditional economics doesn't take into account the natural resources. It's just there for the taking and not accounted for, that it can't be replenished, anytime soon. So it's something that, I can't speak to in detail without having looked at it more so than that to give a more educated answer. But I would say that the more that we can do now, the better, and as soon as possible, for sure.
Right. Great. Thanks very much, Jen. Peter.
Yeah, thanks for that question, because it's obviously high on everybody's list. It's high on the municipality's list, as you'll know from the statement that you just made by way of summary. But the plan, so-called as we currently have it, is basically an outline to bring us to a specific focus and ensure that, as we will, if I'm still around, is to ensure that the climate lens is used in every activity that the municipality undertakes. So, and that's what we've promised that we would do. That's what council has promised it would do. So when this new council makes its way into the room, you have to remind them that that's the case. So we've got, who are the players? You've got the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal government. And we've got more than 3,000 acres of agricultural land in the municipality that is protected by dike land. Control of the dikes is a provincial responsibility, and there is funding set aside in their budget to look after that. And I'm trying to recall, there was over $250,000 allocated to just one of those dike systems, and we've got about 8 marsh bodies that are all protected by dikes. And the province didn't use anything that it had in its budget to do that last year. And now we're 2020, 2021 year, because it goes from March to April. And they haven't used any of the money allocated yet in that budget to repair those dikes. So I don't know where the money's going, perhaps to the people who yell the loudest, which is a fact of political life at the provincial level, I think. So we've got dikes and coastal protection, that's under Minister Colwell. We've got forest management, which is also under the provincial government. Regrettably, municipal governments, who are creatures of the provincial government and only have the powers allocated to them by the provincial government, haven't been allocated any jurisdiction to deal with those particular issues, but municipal governments are the people who are closest, as Jenn has already indicated. On the bottom rung of the ladder happens to be the closest part to the ground. And that's where the people live, and that's where the activities take place. And we're in a position to hear it first, hear it strongest. And we also, as a government, junior government, are able to put pressure on the senior governments, and we do. So we've got then the municipality. So we look after the infrastructure, underground, sewer, water, buildings, pumping stations, and so on, need to be looked at through the climate lens. As you said, we declared a climate emergency. So now what we've got to do going forward, that plan says you have to mitigate, you have to adapt, because there's some things we're not going to change now, it's too late. And we have to, as we go along, take decisions that reduce our GHGs rather, our greenhouse gases. And every action we take has to be through the climate lens. So as a municipality, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind, we're looking at property assessed clean energy programs for residents, loans. And we can't separate the economy from the climate. We have to deal with those in tandem, and I think probably some future questions will draw that out.
Yeah, they will. Thanks very much. I'm glad you mentioned the dikes, because that's a on-the-ground challenge for people who live in Kings County. And I've got another very specific one here for people who live on the North Mountain. The question is, Hurricane Dorian arrived on Saturday afternoon, September 4th in 2019. And by Monday morning, not only were cell phones no longer able to get a signal, but also landlines were dead. Many folks in the Harborville area had no power for 7 days. If a person living alone had been injured or a fire had broken out, there was zero help available for the emergency services, an unforgivable situation. If you were my mayor, what steps would you take to ensure this situation would never happen again? Bearing in mind, we have an older population on the North Mountain, and Nova Scotia Power seems to reconnect denser populations first. And we'll start with you, Peter.
Okay, one of the things that that we have done well in is an emergency measures organization that is now regional. It involves all the towns and the municipality and West Hants. So we've got a permanent fellow in there that handles that. That the whole structure has been built. This building that I'm standing in now is the center, so that if there's an emergency, all operations work out of here. To your point, what's happened during this past year is we've built a vulnerable persons registry. So that vulnerable persons registry should have on it, and if it doesn't, then I encourage folks to get the word out. Hopefully it's there, but if it's not, then we better get it out. That people who should be on that registry with our emergency measures organization for Kings, people that should be on that registry are. So what happens is if communications go down, people go out and they check on the folks that are on the vulnerable persons registry. My lights just went off because I'm not moving around my room. So I'll look after that in a second. If I disappear, that's why I went. So what we've got to do is ensure that they're on the registry. We've got to attempt to have our systems up and going. And the problem is when we roll out our internet services, where are they going? How's it going to get there? It's not underground, much as I'd like to see it underground. It's on the poles. And we pay, by the way, Nova Scotia Power $20 a pole a year to get to the destination.
Wow.
But when the power goes down, it's usually because the tree's fallen across the pole. And if the tree fell across the pole and took out the power line, it also took out the internet line. So those are issues. So we have to make sure that we've got our warming stations. We've got a safe place for people to go if they're able to get out of their home to get there. And that vulnerable people who don't have the transportation and whatnot, someone is designated to go and ensure that they're okay and that they'll get there. So we can't stop hurricanes, but we can prepare for them.
Very good. Thank you very much. Jen, if you were our mayor, what steps would you take to ensure that this situation never happens again?
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is a bit pie in the sky, but I would love for Nova Scotia Power to not be a monopoly. That would be excellent. But that's a pretty big endeavor. One thing that I mentioned citywide internet earlier, and one thing that they did do well was piggybacking off of another internet provider's systems. So they use the same lines. And again, as Peter said, if the line goes down from a tree, everyone's line goes down in that case. But yeah, it saves some of those costs by just using a provider, that having an agreement with the provider rather than starting from scratch with a new infrastructure. As I mentioned, in terms of small scale solar, wind, methane capture. And when I say small scale, I mean backyard small scale, rather than someone having a generator. People think of generators, but they're not passive. You need to keep putting the gas into them. You need to run them. You need to maintain them. You can't just leave it sitting in a basement for 3 years and hope it will help you when your power goes out, not to mention the cost of those. So if there were systems that were currently constantly in place as backup power as needed, and storing into batteries, that would be excellent as well. On top of that, there has been a huge conversion with the phone companies from analog landlines to digital, and I'm really interested in reversing that, because they tried to sell those saying, oh, you'll have it for up to 3 days if the power goes out. Analog landlines would stay inevitably, indefinitely when the power went out. I have no idea who thought that was a great decision to switch that over, but it's been done in a lot of places. And I've refused to let them take the equipment off the side of my house, even though they won't supply the landline. I want that equipment to stay there, because I do believe that change should be made. I wasn't aware of the vulnerable persons registry, so I'll be sharing that information widely. And that's one of my big things, and something that I hope to do regardless going forward, is just increasing visibility, increasing ease of use. I have experience in user design. When I was looking for council minutes, I was able to find out how to listen to them live when they were happening, but I had a heck of a time finding them afterwards. For some reason, the archive version from 2015 was easier to find than the more recent version. So things like that, if I feel like if it takes more than 3 steps, or if a layperson can't access it quickly, it's not accessible enough. So really increasing that. I like clear graphics. I'd love to have Instagram presence, all those sorts of things. And Peter, I heard an ad that you had on the radio today encouraging people to vote. So thank you for doing that, because the more ways that we can have that out there, the better. And just to tag back, to the first question, I'm curious to know, I know there was an instance of someone who declared his forest an art exhibit and was able to protect it that way. I wonder if we could declare our forest a heritage building, perhaps there could be something underground that we a decorative sewer, perhaps, that needs maintenance and is therefore municipally owned and taken care of. But those are just some outside of the box thoughts there.
Outside the box, yes. I'm just going to throw it out to the other participants online here to see if you guys had any further questions off of those answers. Anyone?
No, that was, I think you explained yourselves quite well there.
Did Tim or Debbie want to say anything about Dorian and your experiences and finding out what the services were in different stations?
I'm just curious about I guess the policy in Kings County about cell towers. We seem to be very particularly adverse to putting additional towers up. I know the reception out in this end of the North Mountain is particularly bad. And when we do get cell service, we're actually getting it from a tower over in across the bay on the other side of New Brunswick. So, and I've heard stories, whether they're true or not, about whether or not the towers are just simply a non-starter for Kings County. And you covered the issue about landlines and that sort of thing. But from a technological standpoint, I think a variety of different ways adds redundancy. And I guess my question is, why do we have so few towers in Kings County that would provide additional capacity, I guess, in something like that?
Okay, we'll start with Peter.
Thanks for that question. First of all, from the point of view of the municipality, there is no hesitancy in approving cell towers. I hate to keep saying this, but the municipality has no jurisdiction over cell towers. It's a federal jurisdiction that has to do with communications. So the Eastlinks and the Rogers of the world, if they wish to put a cell tower up, they choose the location. And of course, they're doing that based upon what return will they get from putting that cell tower up, as opposed to if your municipality was in that business, in that space, your municipality would be more concerned about the service than the return, provided the return wasn't too much of a draw on the taxpayers. So when Eastlink wants to put a cell tower up, or Rogers or any of the ISPs or cell providers, cell service providers, their process is they make the application to the federal government, and then the federal government, who used to just say yes or no and off they go, changed their policy a few years ago and said, well, you've got to give notice to the municipality. So the municipality can express an opinion, but you don't have to abide by their opinion. You can just go ahead and put it up if you want, but at least you've notified them and you've told them what the location is, and you've asked them their opinion. So what happens in practice is that when they make an application to put a cell tower up, they notify the municipality. The municipality doesn't have to, but it in fact does, then take the initiative to go out and have what they call a PIM, a PIM, a public information session in the area that's being served, or near where, within 500 feet or a kilometer or whatever it is of the location of that cell tower, and engages the people. And on only one occasion in the last 5 years that I've been around here, have the people objected to the installation of the tower. Most people want the service. They want improved service. We're at a stage now where there is a body of thought out there that worries about the radiation coming off of cell towers, particularly when you talk about 5G. 5G, the reality is that 5G, in order to be at its maximum impact, has to be located in densely populated areas, and they put transmitters that talk to one another up about every 5th telephone pole in order to get the advantages of that. But bottom line to your question is, we don't approve cell towers, but we do have an engagement with the folks around whom the cell tower is, or nearby whom the cell tower is built. They feed in their engagement. Then the representative of the company who wants to do it comes to the meeting at which your council considers it. And your council says, well, we had the information session, we heard from the people don't object. We certainly like to see communications within the municipality, and we therefore have no objection as a municipality. But if the people do object, as they once did, and if it's reasonable in the municipality's opinion, they have good reason for their objection, then the municipality would debate at council whether or not they would give their stamp of approval. Not that it's needed. They all recognize, all council recognizes that it's not needed, that they can proceed on their own if they wish, but they express an opinion. And on the one occasion that we did express an opinion supporting the neighborhood, the cell company moved the location and went elsewhere. So there you go. It works sometimes.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Jen, anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure, and thank you, Peter. I mentioned this in the past discussion that we had too. It's very helpful to me and probably to Shane as well when you go first, because of course you've got the experience, you're on the ground, and you've got the the knowledge. I did learn a lot about when I campaigned provincially, learning that a lot of people, including myself, don't know what's federal jurisdiction, what's provincial jurisdiction, and what's municipal, because a lot of things that you might think would be one or the other or all three are some or neither. Definitely, as was mentioned before, having as much redundancy as we can, but with the improvement of the internet, working towards that, a lot of people use things like Messenger or WhatsApp and different applications. If they're able to get a message out through the internet, then the cell phone, or communicate well using the internet, then the cell phone issue might not be as big of a deal. I use Virgin Mobile, and again, with piggybacking, they use the Bell infrastructure, but some of their services different. And I know that I don't know all of the details about things like public mobile and smaller companies. I'm curious to know what is necessary to be a smaller cell phone company, that is more grassroots, that's more local. That would be, something to look into rather than waiting, because, something as large as Bell or Eastlink isn't as likely to listen to a petition of, say, 50 people in one area who want a cell phone tower, whereas a smaller company could be dedicated to exactly that, to rural cell phone coverage for people who want it, especially when that objection isn't there, because certainly some people have objections to 5G. And I mean, there are 3G networks and 4G, so like it doesn't all have to be, this one. It's been passed, it's passed all of the Health Canada standards, but if people are still unsettled about it for various reasons, there's no reason why it has to be, the latest technology, if having some technology, and signal is better than not having any at all.
Yeah, great. So thanks, Jen. And thanks, Tim, for that question. Anyone else in the audience who wants to expand on being ready for the next hurricane? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next big picture question on climate change. There are basically two ways to mitigate climate change. One is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the other is to increase the absorption of carbon from the atmosphere. On the emissions side, promoting renewable energy projects and electric vehicles are two tactics. The county is pursuing a 4 megawatt solar farm at Meadowview. However, would you advocate for replacing all county vehicles with electric vehicles over the next 4 years? And would you encourage Michelin to build a solar farm so that that company could become carbon negative? And we'll start this time with Jen.
Okay. So let's see here. I agree that both are necessary, reducing greenhouse gases and increasing absorption. No, I would not necessarily advocate for all of the vehicles to be replaced with electric. We do have some charging stations through the county, but I don't know the state of the current vehicles. If the current vehicles are running fine, then I don't think it would be worth all of the resource cost to have brand new vehicles. I've been interested in diesel conversions. So if there's diesel conversions that can run over refined used cooking oil, that would be something that I would consider. That's resource saving in a variety of different ways, and it's a lot more cost effective. In terms of Michelin specifically, absolutely anything that could be done to lessen their impact. They provide a lot of jobs, they provide a lot of industry, but it is at a cost of emissions, at a cost to people's health. So certainly whether it's solar, whether it's looking at the production, and if, there's such a thing as a circular economy or cradle to cradle. So things that are, no longer of use. I've seen really cool, innovative ideas from generally developing nations. There's a woman who makes really beautiful furniture using old tires that are no longer roadworthy, but vulcanized rubber has a really strong smell. And, as much as people make creative things out of tires, they're very durable, and the waste products of those, I would imagine, endure for a long period as well. So looking into, I would advocate more so for reducing the waste rather than looking at solar per se. I would love to see solar shelters in parking lots, perhaps in the county parking lot, municipal buildings in various areas, because the idea for solar roadways has been presented, but there's a huge amount of wear and tear. Whereas if they're overhead, then they create shade, they stop the absorption into the asphalt, which is contributing to that trap, and instead it's being converted into solar energy that way. So those are some ideas I have instead.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Mhm.
Over to you, Peter.
I get so interested in listening to Jen's answers that I forget the question. But I think the answer to both questions from my point of view is yes. First of all, we are engaged in seeking assistance by way of grant. We're committed to it already, but we can make it a much larger and better deal if we can feed into the many grant programs that are available from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities via the federal government, who has contributed quite a lot of money to them to parcel out upon application by municipalities for green energy. Plus the province has a program. So very quickly then, yes, what we plan to do is and hopefully in the proper sequence is get charging stations installed within the municipality. One of the first ones will be here at this site. B, get solar on top of our buildings, all municipal buildings, and feed that, hopefully, feed that charger, among many other things, the building itself, the pumps that supply energy into this building from groundwater. Not groundwater, it's in a continuous loop. That will feed that in and hopefully slow down or reverse our own meter. So in doing that though, we've got sewer pumping stations, 72 of them, I think, across the municipality. So that, back to the hurricane, when we have a problem and the power goes out, those things, the pumping stations that account, compensate for elevations in order to get wastewater up and down through the system, they stop. Our plan is to put solar on each of those pumping stations in order to assure there's continuity. And to Jen's point, battery backup is going to be huge associated with these things, because you've got to store the power in order to make sure it's not just intermittent, that it's continuous. So we're on that track now. And yes, as vehicles are replaced after they've gone their useful life, then the replacement, hopefully, will be an electric vehicle, provided we can have all that infrastructure in place and be able to service it at the time. So that's on the electric vehicle side. In terms of the Michelin thing, it's again, back to the comment that Jen made regarding the circular economy. It's probably not widely known, but Michelin sponsors a conference every 2 years that's international. And everyone who hosts a Michelin plant in their jurisdiction is invited to that conference. And the theme of every conference is the circular economy. Now, this Michelin plant out here happens to be practically right across the street from a large-ish tract of land that's owned by the municipality. we hope, during the next term, if possible, to create a partnership with Michelin where we can do a solar farm on that property and feed in to Michelin. Now, to the extent to which their demand may exceed our ability to supply, all that has to be researched and factored in and discussed with them. And they can't put up with intermittent supply. They have to have a continuous supply of power. But they presently, when the hurricane comes through and their line goes down, everything stops dead. So if we can be able to supply them power in the instance of emergency, let alone feed in during the good times, then that would be a delightful partnership to have. And it would green Michelin, and Michelin's all about being green, as are our two quite large armed forces bases. So we're hopeful that we'll create the partnerships with all of them on the wind power side, the Greenwood base, because we would only be 8 kilometers from Greenwood if we establish wind power in our southwest quadrant, which is now zoned for that type of thing. So yeah, big plans in the works. Can we bring them to fruition over the next term of council? That depends upon the motivation of the councillors that come to the table after the election as well. But we have here and at the administrative level, the horses to do this.
Very good. Thanks very much for that. Anyone in the audience want to add an additional question? Hi, Jackie. Yes.
Hi.
Yeah.
Am I on? All right. I'd just like to pursue a little further the question of wind turbines, if this is an appropriate time.
It is, yes.
What do we have now, first off, in Kings County in the way of wind turbines? And, living over by the shore, every time the wind blows, and it's blowing most of the time, you just get the feel of the tremendous amount of energy that's there and that would be available. But there was a comment made last week in a Zoom meeting with the prospective district councillors that there could be no wind turbines on the North Mountain because of it being on flight paths with Greenwood. So this is a question of, here we have federal jurisdiction telling us what we can perhaps do here in the municipality. But I would like to ask our two candidates for mayoralty what in fact the situation is with regarding the flight plan, because it seems that I know planes are often flying in front of Harborville, right across the bay, but they don't fly everywhere on the North Mountain. And we do, by the way, have cell towers at the top of the mountain. On the Harborville Road, as you come over, you can see over to the east, you can see some cell towers. So if those cell towers can be there, why can't we have wind turbines? I wonder if we could get some clarification on that.
Very good question. And we'll start with Peter.
Hey, thank you for the question. I don't know who represented that to you, but flight path is not a problem at all. The issue is there are two factors that were taken into consideration as to where we would establish industrial size wind turbines. Mm-hmm. We're talking 400 feet in the air. And the studies have shown us that first of all, it's not about the power of the wind, it's about the consistency of the wind. And the studies show, and the provincial on paper studies support the fact that the best wind available is in the southwest quadrant above Greenwood on the South Mountain. And so we have zoned an area there specifically because of that, but it also happened to satisfy the social issue of people were very concerned about having these turbines anywhere close to where they reside, because there's quite a bit of science, and some subscribe to it and some quite frankly don't. But to remove, if in making this decision we were able to remove that controversy, that was just another plus. So two factors. One is we're away from all population. There's no population within 3 kilometers of this site.
Mhm.
And people need not therefore be concerned. And then there's the issue of the consistency of the wind. This is said to be a better site for a wind farm than any farm in Nova Scotia presently established.
Really?
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. So what are the plans then for developing this?
Well, the plan, right now we're engaged in a bit of research regarding radar. So the issue isn't flight path, it's radar. So wind turbines have a bit of a Doppler effect, and
Mhm.
they get shadowing and false imaging. And
Mhm.
so an incoming plane, you might change the image on the radar to have that incoming appear in some other location that it actually is. So you can't have that. You're a defense base. So there is a radar workaround where we're collaborating with the federal government on the defense side in order to come up with a solution for that. I believe, I'm just a lawyer, a recovering lawyer. I believe that it can be overcome based upon what I've read on the topic and the design experts that are manufacturing and installing equipment that gets rid of this effect. So if we can convince the federal government that we've got the solution, then I'm hopeful that we'll be able to go ahead with the wind farm before the end of the next term.
Okay, excellent. Over to you, Jen. Do you want to
Sure.
add anything?
Absolutely. So yeah, I grew up in Pickering, near a nuclear plant, and they also had one of the early wind turbines. So I was able to be around to learn about that, and definitely have heard, as Peter mentioned, people do have kind of kickback against wind turbines, especially the industrial size. There have been people who've experienced different symptoms, and so there's a lot to be said about, as I've mentioned a few times now, much smaller scale as well. Because then you are getting kind of cross-level breezes. If you've ever flown a kite, feeling the difference between having it a few feet off the ground versus way up in the sky. And also having lived in St. Croix near the wind project in Hants, also learning about the wind project there. I've been curious about this sort of thing for years. So yeah, learning that the limiting, the factor that slows those, slows the fins down so they don't just catapult off into oblivion is the majority of the work that a windmill does. It's not hurting anything if it stays low. And the one in Pickering that's in Ontario, only needed about 15-kilometer-an-hour winds in order to start turning. It had a lot of gears and a lot put in place to make that easily functional. And then the difficulty was, that limiting, more energy was expended holding it back than letting it go. And there's been recent research about painting a black stripe so that one of the propellers is black as opposed to the others white because of bird strike issues. My sister's an aerospace engineer, so I've learned a lot of neat things about what happens when birds and engines or propellers of any kind interact. It's generally not good, but there's been all sorts of neat research about that. And then just to back up one step, I know for sure that there's an electric vehicle charging station at Just Us. I know for sure that there's a number of them at the agricultural farm in Kentville. And I do believe, but I can't say for certain, that there's one at Glooscap Station as well, landing just by exit 8A. So some of those things are there. It'll depend in terms of electric vehicles on how far they can get between charges, or if they're a hybrid of gasoline and electric. But at least some of those steps are being done by by people interested in the community already. So that's pretty cool.
Very good. Thanks, Jen. The research I've done on charging stations turned up 7, I believe, in
Ooh,
Kings
nice.
County. And one is actually at Fast Fuel, which isn't far from the county office. But anyway,
Nice.
that's it for the greenhouse gas emissions. On the other side of climate change is carbon absorption. So On the carbon absorption side of the equation, increasing the area covered by trees in Kings County would be one tactic to mitigate climate change. Yet forest cover has actually decreased by 13% over the past 20 years. What is your position on high production industrial forestry, whereby forests are clear cut, glyphosate is sprayed, and a single species is planted? Would you advocate for a long-term restoration of the Acadian forest in Kings County in place of industrial forestry? Start with you, Jenn.
Well, absolutely 100% yes. I'm a little bit sad now that the recording started after my impassioned 5 minutes of information about, but I mean, I can touch on those points again. Soil health, that we're not good forest managers as humans. We're just not. We don't know how to create a forest. We just don't. People have tried, and a lot of the industries are not trying. When they put in monoculture, all that's happening is that in the next 30 years, you can cut those small trees and plant more monoculture, and in another 30 years, cut those small trees. It's not sustainable. As Peter mentioned, we don't have a lot of jurisdiction as it stands currently on the municipal level, but I'm hopeful that we can find creative ways to, to hold on to that, to be the David and the Goliath situation, and by any means necessary. Yeah, clear cutting is not good. I don't know. I mean, it's profitable, otherwise it wouldn't be happening, but profit above all else is how we ended up in this disaster. So absolutely, the more cover we can have, I'm thankful to live in a rural enough area that what we do have control over, as far as I'm aware, is lawns. And I'm thankful to live in a rural enough area that people might look at it a bit funny, but I've been able to let my yard grow pretty much as it wants. What's been there continues to grow, and what's new comes up. And there have been a lot of bees in my yard. There's a lot of pollinators that are there, and there's a lot of energy expansion that goes into maintaining grass, which is really not environmentally friendly. So if we can get past the aesthetics of it, lots of people plant wild, species. Lots of people are doing backyard gardening. The more shade and the more natural growth, and the more we can reintroduce helpful plants on a house by house basis at the residential level, I think changing those attitudes would go a long way as well, more so than we might realize. But I'm absolutely 100% for protecting and restoring the forests as much as we're able.
Excellent, thank you. Peter, what's your position on industrial forestry and the restoration of the Acadian forest?
Let me introduce my comments by saying I don't hold myself out to be any kind of an expert on forests. In fact, I hold myself out as being a person who has a lot to learn about forests. So that said, and intends to, but that said, it's pretty much, I think, an accepted no-brainer that clear cutting is not a good practice. And we as municipalities, to Jen's point, we're influencers. We don't have jurisdiction over this issue, but we are certainly influencers. Back to our original discussion on being able to influence the decisions of senior governments. The paltry amount of land that the Forestry Act now mandates that you leave in a clear cut is really unacceptable. So that has to change. I have no problem in attempting to influence the decisions of the provincial government with regard to their legislation and what needs to be changed within it. On the issue on the issue of spraying, a little known fact is the province sends a notice, and I generally disseminate it to those folks who have expressed an interest and those folks that I know have an interest. They give a notice to municipalities about what areas are going to be sprayed within the province. They give the whole provincial thing, but they have a website that you can go to and find that information out as well. But I, having received it this year, some months ago, not very long, not many months ago, responded with a letter to them and said, look, you mightn't believe this for a fellow of my vintage, but I happen to ride a motorcycle. And every time I go up the number 12 and down to the South Shore, what happens is that when I'm coming back, as a rule, it's when I'm coming back, and so it's likely later in the day. What's happens is I can hardly breathe when I hit Gold River, and then I turn the corner to come up to number 12 toward New Ross, because you've been spraying. Now, people that are traveling happily along in their cars with filters on their systems don't understand, but I can't imagine what the residents are going through that live nearby, and I can't help but think that they're complaining, unless their livelihoods depend upon it. There's the economy over ecology thing that comes in again, which is why we still have tar sands. So this is a very difficult subject. It's the subject of ecology versus economy. That's a very difficult subject, not difficult to think through, but certainly difficult to wade through when your feet hit the ground. So you need to change a lot of opinions, and if you're going to change the economy, you have to do it in a fashion that protects the people that are currently working in those economies. But that can be done. All it takes is dedication by governments. But so that for the clear cut issue. On the spraying issue, I'm concerned about that. But I really am not educated about what it is they have to say about the impact of these sprays. You know, we know, for example, I'm sure that it has to comply with legislation that sets a certain standard, similar to the legislation that sets certain standards in other topics that we've spoken about, such as emissions from cell towers. We need to question time and time again whether those standards are set at a sufficiently critical level that we are indeed protected, A, and B, if you're going to destroy forests, then you pretty much have to be a farm, because you're not going to grow back the old forests. Again, to Jen's point and the point of the person asking the question, we can't. How long does it take to reestablish an Acadian forest? The folks that are harvesting these things treat them as farms, from which they make their income. So it becomes an issue of, well, how many of those do you permit? What acreage do you permit within that business? And what regulations do you form around clear cutting or similar practices associated with those stands of land, which are actually tree farms, they're not forests.
Good. Anyone in the audience like to expand on any of those topics? If not, that's all of the questions in climate change and the environment, and we'll move on now to health and well-being. The next question is very short, and we'll start with Peter. If elected, what would you do to improve our food security over the next 4 years?
Well, let me say that we're blessed to live in the region in which we live, and because of the fact that we can and do have a farming community that sells at the farm gate, and we can support them and they can support us, and food security and farm sustainability are two very important items on our agenda. So we've made sure that farmland in the valley is protected against development of other types. Anybody at a glance should be able to determine how much farmland there is and that it is protected. We should be doing, by the way, the same with, we should be protecting our forest land if we can wade through that morass. So the issue becomes one of intention. People need to engage, and they need to communicate their intention to council. Council has an obligation to go out into the community and get the feedback from the community as to what are best practices, what is it that you want to endorse, what is it that we're not getting behind that we should be getting behind in the way of promoting security and food security and food sustainability. But you know, people who live in very dense populations are at a distinct disadvantage this way. This municipality produces more food for the area that it occupies than any other part of the province of Nova Scotia. So we have innovative, young farmers. We don't have industrial farms. It's those small family farms that make up the municipality's farmland base. And that's what we have to continue to encourage, because that encourages diversity. It gets away from the problems that are associated with industrial farms. So we need to pretty much keep on the track that we're keeping on, but we have to be forever conscious of these things as we move on. So within the coming mandate of council, we have to continue to encourage people to be growing their own food. You're not in Toronto, and even folks in Toronto, perhaps some of them could do this. But if you needed to grow enough vegetables in your backyard in the municipality of Kings, no matter even if you lived within a town, you'd probably be able to do that. But who's doing it is another question. And whether we've reached the point at which they say, well, that's what I should be doing as a responsible person in society, or not, I don't know. That's an open question.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Jen, if you were mayor, how would you improve food security in Kings County?
That's a great question. So Peter mentioned a number of things, like we are in a great area for people being able to grow. A lot of people don't realize that that grocery stores are an illusion, that those full shelves often only contain enough food for 2 or 3 days if those trucks stopped rolling, which is part of why even during COVID-19, the trucks, were crossing all of those borders because we needed those items in stock. Dick Killam in District 3 mentioned the idea of having all young people do mandatory time on farms. I'm not sure I would go that far. A lot of the young people, of course, in this region grow up living and breathing farm and food production life as it is. I would encourage every resident to learn more about it. Not everyone, of course, is capable or wants to garden or grow in their own backyard. I happily pay the money to other people to grow the vegetables and raise the livestock for me. I would love to someday have goats, but I recognize how much of an investment that is, and I'm extremely grateful to the people who do make that their livelihood. I've seen really neat ideas of win-win. It's extending the open farm days idea far beyond one day where you go visit and maybe have a hayride. There's places that have bicycle tractors, so you get on in a row and you're going to show up and pay for your physical exercise and for the ability to go through, similar to the way we have the corn mazes, although those are fun for people, but they're not necessarily connecting them to the growth of those products. So have people pay for the outside time and the exercise, perhaps those vans that are coming back and forth from the city. That's one of my hopes, is that beyond expanding just having wine tours or having the food tours while Devour is happening on a regular basis, have people come out and experience what there is in the valley, have distinct curated tours regarding that, much the same way that you can call up Efficiency Nova Scotia, or Think Well Shift, and they'll come into your home through the, through the use of grants and change out your light bulbs that are, not the most efficient for more energy efficient light bulbs, or give you a more water aerating shower head. People who work on farms are busy people. They can't necessarily go. They often will, take the time. When I was on a farm in Cold Springs, Ontario, we went to a solar energy, it was retrofit, feed-in tariff conference, but it was at a cost of time and energy to go and prioritize that. I've been to some neat conferences on agricultural and really learned a lot from them. Soil health is so important, and a lot of our farms are using glyphosate on a wide scale, and it is dangerous and it is detrimental to the soil. So making it not just economically feasible, but also in the interest for health of the food producers to learn about different alternatives. So yeah, like Efficiency NS or Think Well Shift, having a person who can come to your farm at no cost to you, kind of like an occupational therapist, combination of those things to make sure that the way that your setup is, no one's unnecessarily hurting their back or crouching for longer than they need to, that the, and looking at the culture as well. We've got some really great rewarding relationships. I know Taproot Farms gets a lot of returning workers from Jamaica. And of course, with COVID, there were all sorts of different difficulties with that. And Dan Han also features the different people who've come, where they've come from, how many years they've been working. They've added new lights to extend their growing season, looking at greenhouses, looking at different things. I mean, there might be people who'd be willing to have a greenhouse or a garden on their property, and maybe some more energetic, physically fit people would come and tend to that land. The people who want to do the gardening and the people who have the space to do it are not necessarily always the same people. I'd love to see more of our produce in the gas station. Sometimes you can get a slightly stale egg sandwich or, a pack of baby carrots, but to be able to stop there. I love the farmers markets, but I don't love crowds. I've been using the Wolfville Farmers Market to go, or going to places like Noggins or Sterling's where you can stop in on a wider scale. They're open 8 to 8 as opposed to needing to go just on a Saturday morning when everybody else is going. So extending those, fighting when decisions are made that are not in the best interest. So there are people currently fighting now with the school systems who made the decision just to standardize the meals, but the meals went to meat and grain heavy and lost a lot of the vegetables and lost a lot of the local sources. And there's really not an excuse for that when we have so much. And the people the year before, a lot of good people from District 3 were the ones doing the work to make sure that that food was sourced local and that the kids were trying new foods on a regular basis. So I would say keeping all of that up and going forwards even further. I'm glad to hear that so much farmland is protected. And yeah, if we can protect the farmland, there's got to be a way to protect the forest. I'm sure of it.
That's a good segue actually into the next question. And in the interest of time and knowing how many questions we have here, we're about halfway through. So I'd ask you to maybe pick up on the, take less time on the answers.
Okay.
So Jen, to you, exactly what bylaws would you promote to keep agricultural land from being subdivided for residential construction, thus preserving our agricultural land for future food production?
Well, I don't have an answer into the specifics, but I would say protecting agricultural land, because once it's buried under a high rise, you can't get it back.
Okay, Peter.
Well, am I going to be held to that brief standard? That the bylaws are in place. We just recently passed our municipal planning strategy, and the bylaws go with that. And all A1 land is now specifically for agriculture. You cannot you can't build a house on A1 land unless you're going to farm the land. And you can prove that you're going to farm the land. So we actually we send all this planning material after we've had years, literally, of consultation regarding it. We enact it here, and we send it to the province because the province has to approve it, because we're just the children of the province. The province actually came back because one of the provincial statements of interest is the protection of agricultural land. And if you're going to change your bylaws in any municipality from agricultural to something else, for development, for example, then the minister has a look at that. And also looks at your engagement process and your consultations and so on. But their mandate is to protect agricultural land, as is ours. And I've said to the province time and time again, take it. You be the protectors of agricultural land. Then you haven't got 4-year rotations of municipal councillors who might upset the apple cart. No pun intended.
Very good.
However, it's still with us. It is protected, and it will remain protected as long as I'm kicking the wheels on the bus.
Okay, very good. Next question for you, Peter. What could the municipality do to promote adequate housing for low-income residents of Kings County?
Yeah, this is a topic that comes up often. I'm just going to say this one more time. And then every time I say province, you'll know what I mean. This is a provincial jurisdiction. Housing. We pay a great deal of money into the social housing projects within the municipality of Kings. And we got a real shock this year because they had let their housing stock deteriorate. The condition of the housing stock deteriorate. And we have to cover the cost of the capital improvements in the area. The province covers some, we cover too much for the low budget of the municipality when surprises like that come along. So if 50 cents of every dollar that comes into the municipality in property tax goes to mandatory payments to the province and protective services. And when they come in with a surprise, like they negotiate teachers' salaries, but we pay $1 million a month to the municipal school system. And so they negotiate teachers' salaries, and all of a sudden there's a bump that we've had no control over, then that increases, and we haven't had an opportunity to see where we're going to get the revenue from. The same thing applies to our CMP services. We don't negotiate those salaries. We're just sent a bill. And on it goes. So the effort that we have to make is to be able to get better communication between ourselves and the province as to where these costs are going. We have to have more input. While we get to recommend a person to sit on that housing authority, we don't get to appoint them. So they can decline our recommendation. In fact, right now, there is no Kings County representative on that housing authority because nobody stepped up when we advertised the position. So do we really care? Because nobody's even stepped up for that position.
Is it a paid position?
I don't know. We don't pay them. The government pays them. That other government. So what happens? I believe that there's a neat little project in Queens County where there's a whole subdivision devoted to tiny homes. And I think that's great. They're all, because they're small, they're manageable. You can keep them in very good condition. They've got all the services of every other resident in the municipality. And we should be promoting those kinds of things. And I think that the provincial housing department, under the Department of Housing and Municipal Affairs, both under the same minister, should be coming up with some solutions. But unfortunately, that's treated as the minor portfolio in the provincial government.
Very good. Thanks, Peter. Jen, how can the municipality promote adequate housing for low-income residents?
For sure. So yeah, I am going to look further into that housing committee. I mentioned in the first debate we had with the Annapolis Valley Chamber of Commerce that when I did work at Larson, when I worked at Landmark East, when my room and board were covered, and I didn't have to work all of my waking life, then I had the time. I sat on the board of directors of a community risks assessment group called, it's now called Gambling Risks Informed Nova Scotia. At the time, it was King's Community Action Group on gambling risks, gambling and its impacts. I would look at accessibility, the current buildings on their first level, are they wheelchair accessible? Are there laundry facilities on those first levels? I don't see any reason why the first level of every multi-unit building couldn't be or shouldn't be accessible. I recognize that there's a huge cost in some cases for retrofitting where it wouldn't be worth it. We don't have, it'd be worth looking at the population that does require that access, but recognizing that every year that goes by, that number is going to go up. We have an aging population. Looking at options for multi-unit developments, having services like having parks. When I was in Colombia, there was a neat set of towers, and within the set of towers, they sort of circled around a communal park. So even though somebody might live on the 16th floor, they had a park that was their park. It wasn't necessarily private, but it was available. And of course, as mentioned, there's a lot that happens at the provincial level and the federal level. But increasing the accountability of landlords. There are people that have done a lot of work in the city and also in our region, especially in Wolfville, for example. There were a number of landlords taking a security deposit from students at the start of the year and then not giving it back unless someone prompted them for it. And if you're a student and you're busy and you forget, that's easily thousands of dollars a year that people are just taking and putting in their pockets. I responded to a question from realtors about ways to move forward, and I think looking at the legislation for things like garage conversions, backyard builds, tiny homes. I wouldn't recommend putting it all in one place. That's often given as a solution, especially for homeless people, and not every homeless person wants to live in a tiny house. So the idea is to give people with disabilities, people with public assistance, as many of the same options as everybody else gets to choose who they want to live with, how they want to live, where they'd like to be, what they'd like to have near them. So just looking at all of those things, how to make it easier for the people who are having it the toughest, because they probably are not the ones who have the time to sit on a committee and yell about it.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Moving on to the next group of questions under the topic of the economy. Jen, to you. As we recover from the pandemic, there have been calls by some candidates in Kings County for austerity and limits to municipal spending in some areas, notably trails and alternative energy initiatives. Where do you stand on spending cuts versus economic stimulus?
That's a very good question. So I'll echo what I said earlier. And I know that lots of people have talked about lowering taxes. I would not be one of those people. I would not talk about lowering taxes. One thing I would look at is the deed transfer tax, because that stops a lot of people from being able to being first-time home buyers. So I would be open to extending the length of time for that and lowering the cost significantly over time by letting that stretch out. There's a difference, as I mentioned, in investment versus spending. So for example, I drove to Dartmouth today, and there's a huge stretch of concrete road, and provincial governments don't tend to like to invest in concrete road. It lasts a lot longer, but it costs more, and your voters get angry during your 4 years if you invest that money, as opposed to being grateful for it 12 years later when the asphalt roads are falling to bits and the concrete roads are still okay. So it's looking at what is worth the investment. We don't want to spend everything we have and have nothing left in case of emergency. We do need to be careful with the cost, because no one predicted COVID-19, although perhaps, maybe more people should have. There were some warning signs from different people, and it may be more of our new reality. Things may be more, quote unquote, extreme as time goes by. But I don't see how reducing maintenance to trails or lessening the environment is often, one of the things someone said that, it's too costly to be energy efficient. It might be costly now, but there are different ways to look at it, and not spend money just because it says solar on it, but to look at what the actual environmental costs are as well, to factor those in, and to keep future generations in account.
Very good, thank you. Peter, where do you stand on spending cutbacks versus economic stimulus?
I stand in favor of economic stimulus. Now, the difficulty, you have to face the realities. The realities are that it's very likely that over the next 2 years, the revenues for municipalities are going to decrease, because some portion of our revenues are associated with tourist accommodations, apartment buildings, or, well, let's leave apartment buildings out, but tourist accommodations, malls where the tenants of malls are not doing well and they can't afford to pay their rent. And so what happens is that the people who we hire to do municipal assessments assess those types of income properties based upon their income, not upon the value of the property. So the Cornwallis Inn in Kentville would be assessed based upon its income, not according to the value of the Cornwallis Inn, which is sometimes quite a lot more than the income would specify. So it's as if you were buying the building, you'd pay for it based upon its income. So those assessments will go down and our revenues will go down. So, but I still say stimulus, and you can't separate, in my view, there's no need to separate what you're going to do in terms of economic stimulus from the ecology. So you can protect the ecology by building solar farms, by building wind farms, by promoting agri and ecotourism within this area in particular, by creating loans to taxpayers. They can pay back over a period of years with their taxes in order to retrofit their homes, in order to make them more energy efficient. Putting solar panels and alternative energy into municipal buildings, back to the charging stations and the solar panels on the roof and heating by circulating water through the system, as opposed to putting in electric heat that sucks it off the power grid, that pulls it from coal-fired generation or other fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you. To you again, Peter. Unfortunately, Kings County has become known as a business unfriendly municipality. What would you do to streamline and rationalize regulations to make small business startups and expansion a less stressful experience?
Well, I'd like to sit down with the person that asked the question.
He's right on the line.
I don't agree with the premise. The reason why a county like Kings County has that reputation is based upon the fact that some folks would say, well, we wanted to put our whatever it was in your county, but you made it so difficult that we went across the border to Hants County or across the border to Annapolis County. Well, you know why? Because they don't do land use planning. They don't zone and have restrictions. Everybody, however, must, when you send out, they must have their buildings inspected as they build. So what is being complained of? Any building inspector goes in, and what they inspect, what they use as a basis for their inspection is the National Building Code. So life safety, quality of construction has to meet the National Building Code, no matter where in the province you're building, whether it's Kings County or Annapolis County or Hants County. So what's the difference between these municipalities with regard to inviting new business? None, other than zoning. We're not going to let you put the new business on agricultural land. We're not going to let you put an apartment building in an R1, R2 zone, and so on. So I would like to sit down and have a broader discussion or a more detailed discussion about the premise of the question.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Jen, what would you do to streamline and rationalize regulations to make small business startups and expansion a less stressful experience in Kings County?
So it's not necessarily in terms of the regulations, but I've had a number of ideas that could help. I was grateful to be able to participate somewhat in the SEB program. I forget what that stands for, but it's through PeopleWorks and through NSCC, and I was able to sit in for a friend a few days when he wasn't able to go, and they covered all sorts of things like financing, marketing, helping people to be able to choose an affordable price to charge for their services. There's a lot to be said about people, operating their businesses out of their homes as well. A lot of times they can feel like they're not being represented, or that things are more difficult for them in terms of regulations. So one of the things, and actually Peter sort of mentioned it with the malls, the County Fair Mall is, underutilized. And so, to provide an option, for example, of say 1 day a month or 1 week a month, where a business that does not have a permanent storefront can come in, can learn about the challenges firsthand, to have a setup, point of sale already set up for the business, to have, everything ready for them to come in. That way the inspection's out of the way, all of those other things, and they can try it out, see, do they like having a business, with a storefront in a highly trafficked area, to kind of go through the growing pains of that without having to buy a building and then realize, oh dear, the parking lot is just not big enough for these, for our customers, and then to be stuck with that. So that, and when I spoke to the Realtors Association, I talked about how when I bought my my home with the help of my parents, I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. I paid for an inspector to come, and every other prospective buyer also paid for an inspector to come. And the same thing happens on the business level. I would love to see, a setup where an inspection is done, and then that inspection is available publicly for, whether it's 3 months, an amount of time that allows people to benefit from it, keeps the inspectors in business, keeps it relevant, so that, and there's probably lots of other ways of, lowering those hurdles, not necessarily regulation wise, but finding out what those challenges are and doing everything that we can to help.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Jen, again to you. What would you do to increase the tax base in Kings County?
That's a good question. So, as what I do know is that for municipality, as Peter mentioned, it comes from income and it comes from property. It comes from the property assessments, but it's the income potential of those properties. So yeah, talking about ecotourism, as I mentioned, about having different kinds of food tours come to the valley, having people come and stay from possibly closer by. One of the things that I've wanted to do is short-term respite. So whether it's a vacation for a person with a disability or for the caregivers of a person with a disability, expanding the options for people to be moving around within the region to help with that revenue that might be dipping because, people aren't traveling from afar as much as they were before. Looking at the different, looking at where the expenditures are, and and as Peter mentioned, a lot of it is dictated provincially. I'm curious to know how much we can receive a bill and say, no, we're not going to pay all of that. How is that going to go over? I have no animosity against the RCMP, but they've got a brand new building in New Minas. Whenever I see their uniforms, they're very sharp. Whereas when I was a volunteer firefighter with Greenwich, the uniform was very hand-me-down, and I was in boots that were 3 times too big, while I was in probation, until they could decide whether or not it was worth the investment for me to have boots, that were the right size. In the meantime, I was clonking around and falling over myself. When I was in Army Cadets, we got hand-me-down uniforms, and that was, pretty sturdy material. So I don't know whether or not the uniforms get handed down, when an RCMP officer retires, or if there's other cost-saving measures that they could be doing that they are not currently doing. So a lot about cost savings from a creative standpoint, as opposed to necessarily expanding the base, although that would be excellent as well.
Yeah, great, thanks. Peter, how would you increase the tax base in Kings County?
Well, there are a number of ways, actually, and when I first occupied this chair, I came in with a mantra that I keep preaching and pleading with senior governments over, is municipalities must be given an opportunity to create alternative revenues other than dipping into the property taxpayer's pocket in order to generate them. And one of the ways to do that is to create our own energy systems, such as from wind power or solar power. I can tell you that the small municipality of Chester drops about $1 million a year to their bottom line simply by virtue of the fact that they own an interest in a wind farm. So that's one way. The other way is, and Jen, I don't say this to correct you, because everybody would just assume that we have de-transfer tax because virtually every other municipality in the province of Nova Scotia has it. We don't.
Oh.
So de-transfer tax, for those of you not familiar with it, is if you were to sell your home and you lived in a municipality other than Kings, the purchaser would probably pay, in addition to the purchase price, would pay the municipality 1.5% of the purchase price. Imagine the revenue that's generated in the city of Halifax based upon that formula every time a property is sold. 1.5% goes to the municipality. It's a great revenue generator that we've been trying to avoid in order that we can not burden young families who are getting mortgages based upon the value of their property and what company wants to loan you money based upon this thing in the air, which is 1.5%. It's not an asset. So you could get it that way. You could introduce deed transfer tax if you had to, without increasing the tax, your taxes and my taxes in the general tax base. But that's the real way to do it, is create alternative sources of revenue. And that's perfectly doable if we can only get the province off their high horse and enable these things by legislation. Right now, we can do the power thing, and we intend to. But there are other ways of generating alternative sources of revenue so that we don't have to keep going back to the property taxpayers' pockets, because we're a service provider. We provide services in the form of garbage collection and sewer and water and so on, and internet very soon. But you know, they collect, the province and the feds collect people tax. They collect tax based upon your income, not upon how much you choose to improve the value of your property. It's a dastardly form of tax, but it's all we have.
Great, thanks very much, Peter. That's it for the economy questions. Now we're going to move into some questions on communications. And we spoke about this earlier, but we'll start with you, Peter. In recent council meetings, we've witnessed aggressive, disrespectful behavior, verging on bullying, directed from a single councillor towards female members of council. What will you do to stop this behavior, and how will you contribute to a more respectful, transparent, and collegial atmosphere in council?
Thank you for that question. You have no idea how bad it would be if there wasn't a chair who was prepared to hold people to account for their behaviors. The problem is we get what we vote for. And if a councillor makes it to the table with the kind of attitude and behavior that you just described, that's on us. We elected that individual to come to the council table. So first of all, people have to examine the records and histories of the people that they cast their vote for. Unfortunately, when someone does get to the council table who has that kind of an attitude, then it's incumbent upon the chair to hold them to account, and outside the room and inside the room. And if the chair is too busy to notice what's happening, or has become a little blunted to it, then it's up to individual councillors to call a point of order on that individual. And then the chair must deal with it. Now, I said that I came to council initially midterm before I became mayor. Midterm, not midterm, and in the latter year and a half of the term of a female councillor who was being bullied all around the table. There wasn't just one individual, it was about 4 individuals. And that was the attitude of them all. So that's why I came, was to stop that kind of thing. And, but it's ever so much easier if you simply don't elect them.
Very good.
The individual that, or an individual, I won't name any individuals.
Thank
An individual the other day accused me a bit of being a dictator for having called them to account.
Thank you, Peter. Over to you, Jen.
Absolutely. I would go the other way. I'm not going to name names, but I would say name names. If you know someone who has treated somebody unfairly, spread that information in the same way that women will tell others. Someone that I know got a message from someone who was an ex saying, I hope that they've changed, but in case they haven't, this was my experience, you know, it's up to people to try and protect each other. I have experience with facilitation as well. I was on a bike tour. There were 19 of us, and we had to come to a consensus decision before we were able to leave that meeting table on any number of things, whether it was the food that we ate, and we had vegans, omnivores, carnivores, everything, vegetarians, whether it was on, you know, how our budget was being spent, on the routes that we were traveling, whether or not they were safe, and all 19 of us needed to discuss. I think a lot of people need to know that lesson, that if you're attacking someone's point, I think attack is still not the right word. If you're disputing someone's point, you're not attacking the person. You know, if it's anything, you know, and in general, if you insult somebody about anything, if it's not something they could change within 10 seconds, it's not fair. You know, if someone has an issue with my hair color, I would take significantly less offense to that than if they had with my values, because those mean a lot to me and I've put a lot of time and research into them. I don't know if I've mentioned my background is in education. I often say that politics would be a whole lot better if there were more kindergarten teachers employed. I think it is important to speak to people, you know, in private, but I also think that, you know, behavior like that needs to be called out when it happens, as it's happening on record, you know, whether that's being broadcast by video, whether it's happening auditorily live. People need to know that that's not okay, that it will not stand. If someone's being interrupted, and it happens especially to women all of the time, if they're being interrupted in the middle of their allotted time when they're allowed to speak, that's not okay. And it happens quite often. It was happening in the US, you know, at the highest level. That's not okay. You know, I want our politics to be more than an example of what not to do. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much. During the election campaign, you learn a lot about the needs and concerns of the people of Kings County. If you're elected as mayor, how do you plan to stay informed of those needs and concerns? Jen.
Peter, did you want to say something?
Well, no, I was, I was just going to throw in on the last question one sentence, and that is that the issue with that the inquirer was inquiring about the individual had to do with constant disrespect, not interruption, and frankly, that was simply part of the DNA of the individual. That's not something that you can change. So all you can do is change the person in the seat, change the occupant of the seat.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
You should.
Sure.
How do you plan to stay informed of the needs and the concerns of the people of Kings County after being elected?
Certainly. So one of my ideas is to rotate the quote unquote office. We've been learning a lot about home offices as time's gone by. It's a little bit selfish because Coldbrook is pretty far from where I am in Lockhartville at the border. So I would look at the 9 districts, and I was thinking of spending, you know, a 9-week rotation, 1 week at each. When I've done meetings as a wedding celebrant, I'll often meet with people in a local coffee shop, and of course, all of that depends on the pandemic. But having open office hours available and switching that spot so that people don't, the onus isn't on the residents to make the time and to come, making the meetings more accessible, connecting with people, having availability. I tried the other day to leave a message for an MLA and accidentally reached them in person by phone at 11 p.m. because it was her cell phone number, Barb Adams, totally awesome. And we had a really long chat, and she made some time for me to talk, and it was about home care and having autonomous decision making as a person with a disability to manage their own home care and all of the different difficulties coming up with that. But just being willing to listen, responding to emails, having my phone number out there, checking in, going to events, reading articles, you know, watching people's social media. There's lots of people who have their interests and their inputs and their concerns. And as Peter mentioned, it can't just be the squeakiest wheel. There's a difference between what's important, what's urgent, what's necessary, and what's annoying. And so it's a heck of a job to sift through all of that and know what the concerns are.
Good. Over to you, Peter. How will you stay informed after the election?
Well, what Jen said, and then, no, that was a good answer, Jen. It's remain always accessible. Right? During my 4 years, I've been here every day of the week, all day, every day. So I'm always accessible. My phone number is out there. People can call me anytime. My email is there. I'm in here. So they know where to come to find me. But further than that, never, to my knowledge, in the history of the municipality, except in the latter part of my term. Well, to be fair, we've moved to a mayor system. And I'm sorry that this is going to take a little bit of time. We used to be a warden system. So the difference between those two is that wardens were simply elected. They were just an ordinary councillor. Nothing, not to say councillors are ordinary, but they're only elected by a district. So for 3,500, 4,000 people then, because we had 10 districts, or 11 districts rather, one district would elect all the councillors. They'd all come into a room, and on the first day that they were in the room, the Act, Municipal Government Act, said you have to appoint from amongst your number a warden. So then they'd all go out in the hall, if they hadn't been on the phone with one another prior to getting there in the first place, and they'd start dickering and trading as to who would become the warden. And they'd all come back in the room, and whoever got the majority of votes became the warden. So now you've got, if you had 9 on the council, you'd have 5 people who voted for the warden perhaps, and 4 people who didn't. So you've started with a division on council. So thankfully, we moved to the mayor system. And the mayor system, under the mayor system, the mayor is elected by all 39,000, 36,000 and some voters within the municipality in our population of 50-some thousand. So the mayor owes allegiance to no district. The mayor owes allegiance to no councillor. The mayor is independent. So it makes a difference. So under the mayor system, I said, well, what we're going to do is I'm going to have a meeting in every district, because the people of every district voted for me. At least if they didn't vote for me, I'm still responsible to them. So we're going to have a meeting in every district. Well, some of the older councillors quite objected to that, because you're coming into my district. That's my district. No, it's our district. It's yours and mine. Would you like to come along to the meeting? It can be your meeting or it can be my meeting, but we're both going to be there. And we're going to present what it is this municipality is all about, and what it does, and what it's done up to this point in time. And we're going to answer all the questions and concerns of the people in the room. And each time we went, the people said, this has never happened before. This is wonderful. You're going to have to continue to do this. Do it more often. And I'm totally on board with that. That has to happen.
Very, very good, Peter. Thanks for that. In the interest of time, we have about 10 or 15 minutes left, and we have 2 questions. So Peter, to you, during the pandemic, our daily lives have changed dramatically. Our work and schooling is now focused squarely on the internet. What will you do to promote better high-speed internet for communities in District 3? That's the North Mountain from Morden to Harborville, or to Halls Harbor.
Well, anybody who was on this call when we first started speaking before it became formal would have been aware of the conversation around where the King's fiber is going to be rolled out. So brief background. Kings County is one of the owners of a backbone fiber that runs all the way from Dalhousie University to the Annapolis County line, Middleton, or Lawrencetown. Off that backbone, we intend to run laterals. Think of it as a highway or a sewer. We intend to run laterals. And we had established a plan that would have been an investment of about $7 million. It's now backed off to significantly less than that because other orders of government got involved and they started working on a mandate. We got to roll this out fast. We got to bring in all the big players who have been funded previously and not gone to the ends of the earth in order to pick up the houses that they would never want to go to because there's not a density of population. So fund those folks, and they come in and they started nibbling at the edges of our plan, and they took off. So let's call them Class C areas of population density, which eroded the business plan for us, not to mention took the territory away. But we're still going to do it. We're still going to roll internet out, but we're not going to catch everybody in one blow. So what's going on in your area is we're going to go up the Black Rock Road. We're going to catch everything right to the harbor, and we're going to catch everything on the east side. So Brown Mountain Road, Black Rock Road, the harbor and everything on the east side. The west side isn't going to be served in the first round. We know that there's a small-ish populated area on the west side that's fairly close. We're trying to work out an answer for that small area, and hopeful that we can include them or have them included. But we're partnering with Cross Country and who already have some wire out there.
That's exactly where I live, Peter. So I hope you can find a solution.
Yeah, is it? Well, true story. I didn't know that, but I'm happy I said it. So it's still from the county's point of view, a $3.5 million investment, our portion, and the rest is coming from a federal government grant. But we get to go back in another round. So to get directly to your point, that rollout will not be complete and everybody hooked up until June of 21. But as it is rolled out, I have no doubt that Cross Country will jump on at different points and go down into communities that are close, as long as it's there's a reasonable population there to do it, and start connecting right away. Everything on the east side.
Great. Thank
Hopefully
you.
they'll see a business case for getting into you folks, but we go back to the funders and we say, look, you can't just leave those people there as an island. I mean, they're too close. Let's get that done.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Over to you, Jen, and going to ask you to try to be brief so we can get the last question in.
Sure thing. So yeah, I'd be coming more from a research standpoint, checking in with Seaside Wireless, Citywide, Cross Country even. As I mentioned, when I lived on Cape Breton Island, I was in a town of a population 56, and I think it was down to about 49 by the time I left there, Orangedale, Cape Breton, and we got high speed. So, you know, looking into how that happened and why it happened and how to make that happen, and also just to ask folks who's ready to do this, who wants to have an internet business, and what can we do to facilitate that. I was mentioning how there aren't burrito places in the Valley. I would love to see a burrito place in the Valley. I don't want to be the person who lives and breathes burrito. I don't want to be the owner of a burrito place franchise, and I don't think it should be the municipality's main purview. Internet is very important, but the municipality has a lot of things to do, one of which is improving the communications infrastructure. So the more that we can see who out there is passionate about it, it's one of those things to turn it on its head. That's who we are. The people who you choose to represent you. And one of the things that that people can be prepared for is the question, well, what have you done about it up until now? If all you've done is pick up the phone and say, I don't like this, there might be a little bit more legwork that needs to be done. Not that it's all on the residents, but that there are probably some enterprising people out there with the ideas who might just need a hand finding grants or getting through some of those loopholes, getting connected to the right organizations to move that forward on their own. I also have a family member who works directly. Her full-time job is providing internet to the remote north of Canada. So there's a lot of expertise that I could lean on through that as well.
Great, thanks very much. Very last question. There are at least 2 Michelin employees who are running for council. If they are elected, how would you handle situations in which issues that relate to Michelin come up in council? And we'll start with Jen.
Sure. I think stating potential conflicts of interest is important. And I don't see a harm if something benefits, it's a matter of who does it benefit. If it benefits Michelin as a company and it doesn't benefit the surrounding community, that's a potential issue. So just a matter of, declaring those, being aware of them, not automatically assuming that that because a person is connected with it, that they will automatically be on the side of Michelin. There have been a lot of employers that I've worked for who have not been my best friends. But I am curious, going back to a previous question, I worked at HGS, the call center in the Kemptville Industrial Park, and they have generators. I would have to drive in the middle of a snowstorm when nobody else was going to work, including, like Peter said, the Michelin plant shutting down. So whatever they did to run, 50 plus computers so that people could get help with their internet issues would be worth looking into. But yeah, just declaring that. And to go back just briefly to the other question about respect around the council table, rather than this is, Peter and I agree on a lot of things. One of the places that we do disagree is whether or not people can change. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying to somebody, you get to speak again when you can do so with kindness, compassion, and empathy. And that person can try. And if they do not succeed, it's a bit like training, a creature, if you need to go, that wasn't quite it. And let someone try again. Thanks
for that. Peter,
on the
question of conflict of interest.
Jen, if the creature gets reelected, I'm going to introduce the two of you.
I'll bring the citronella collar.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sorry.
Peter? Patrick, what was the question?
Yeah, it was the question about Michelin. There's 2 guys running.
Oh, yes.
Who are employees.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, there's direct connection and there's oblique connection. So it's one could say, for example, well, if a farmer runs and gets elected, should you do anything that benefits the Kings County Agricultural Society because they're on the board? Or should you do anything that benefits the Board Chamber of Commerce because they're on the board? Well, this is a small community and we're all associated in one way or another with many, many things. So if this person's job depended upon the decision that was on the table, then they better declare a conflict of interest, because if their vote is the deciding vote, somebody else is going to accuse them of the conflict of interest, and then you're in a real maelstrom of trouble. But to Jen's point, if it's a global, first of all, we're never going to do anything for Michelin. Any association with a company like Michelin is not because we're giving them money or doing something specifically to benefit them at the cost of the taxpayer. What we're doing is a partnership that benefits the entire municipality. But on the assumption that we were doing something that was of benefit to some organization or company for which you worked, and your job depended on the result of that vote, then you had better declare a conflict of interest. And we have a code of conduct that mandates that, and the Municipal Elections Act mandates that, and there are all kinds of laws that govern that kind of behavior.
Great.
Includes your family, by the way.
Okay, thank you very much. In the couple of minutes we got left before Zoom kicks us off, are there any other questions in the audience? Tim, Derek, Peter, Jackie? Have we covered everything? This is your last chance.
I think you're. I think it's been a very good session. I think you're out of time. I'm sure they will kick you off. So
Okay.
probably best not to get into another complex question.
Okay. In that case, I want to thank both Jen and Peter for taking the time. Peter, I think we went over your 1.5 hour suggestion, and I appreciate you all your time, and thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you very
both.
much.
And
Thank
we
you
all,
both. It was excellent.
night,
Excellent.
Jen.
Thank you very much.
nice
Apologies to your family, Peter. I know you said 1.5 hours. And thanks for your patience. Thanks, everyone. Good internet as far as I could see. So thank everyone required.
Nice to meet you, Jen.
Likewise.
And we all know how to vote now.
Excellent.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night now.
Thanks, Patrick.
You're welcome.